The courthouse air was the kind that clung to your skin, thick, heavy, electric. Every whisper seemed to scrape against the varnished walls. Every shuffle of shoes echoed like a verdict waiting to be read. Kayla Monroe sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight but not rigid, the kind of poise you only get from years in uniform and under fire. 10 years as a Navy SEAL had taught her how to breathe through a sandstorm, how to hold still while the world tried to shake her loose. Today, it wasn't desert wind she was facing. It was something colder, meaner, and far more personal. Across the room, Officer Trent was already glaring, his jaw tight, his hand resting just a little too possessively on his belt. He wasn't the defendant you see in courtroom dramas, cowed and cautious. No, his eyes carried the same arrogance she'd seen in warlords who believed the rules didn't apply to them. The judge's gavel cracked through the tension, but Trent didn't look toward the bench. His stare stayed locked on Kayla, unblinking, loaded with the kind of challenge that made the air feel thinner. She didn't give him the satisfaction of looking away. The silence between them was its own conversation, one he thought he was winning, and one she knew would end very differently. Reporters shifted in their seats, cameras already trained on the plaintiff's table. Somewhere in the gallery, a phone camera's red light blinked. The world was watching, even if it didn't yet know what it was about to see. She turned her head slowly toward him, eyes locking, voice low enough for only him to hear. "You just signed your own dismissal." She knew the cameras were rolling. She knew the microphones had caught enough. But more importantly, she knew she held the one thing that could end his career before the day was over. A direct line to the highest levels of federal oversight, the kind that doesn't care about small-town politics. This was no longer just about a civil case. This was about police misconduct on full display, about accountability that could no longer be buried under paperwork or backroom deals. The room hadn't even found its breath again, and already the temperature had shifted. People weren't just witnesses, they were participants in a story that was about to break wide open. Somewhere in the back row, a phone camera's red light blinked. The world was watching, and the countdown had already begun. Kayla didn't move when the bailiff stepped between them, a flimsy attempt to restore decorum in a room where the damage had already been done. Her eyes tracked Trent as he backed toward his table, still radiating that smug defiance, as if the rules here were written for everyone but him. She'd seen that look before, in interrogation rooms where a captured insurgent would smirk because he thought help was coming. The truth was, help rarely came for people who thought they were untouchable. In this courthouse, though, the deck had always been stacked. That was why she was here in the first place. The incident that brought them both to this room had started months ago, on a quiet stretch of state highway just outside her hometown. Kayla had been driving back from visiting her mother, the late afternoon sun flashing in and out between the trees when Trent's cruiser pulled in behind her. The lights flared, and that sickly red and blue wash filled her mirrors. He claimed her tail light was out, but the questions turned invasive almost immediately. Where she lived, why she was there, whether the vehicle was even hers. When she calmly handed over her military ID and Navy SEAL credentials, his demeanor changed, but not in the way it should have. He told her she was making him nervous, ordered her out of the car, and before she could even step fully onto the shoulder, his hand was on her arm, twisting her into a position she knew all too well from training. Only this time, she wasn't the one in control. He didn't know about the dash camera she'd installed. He didn't know that every word, every shove, every unlawful command was already preserved. And he didn't know she'd go straight to a civil rights attorney the moment she could walk without limping. In a town like this, bringing a police misconduct case was like lighting a match in a dry forest. You knew the fire would spread, but you had to be ready for the smoke. From the moment the lawsuit was filed, Kayla noticed the stairs. Her car was parked 2 blocks from her apartment one morning, and she found a slow leak in one of the tires. Another day, a patrol car idled just outside her gym for 20 minutes before pulling away. It wasn't enough to act on, but it was enough to remind her they were watching. In court, All of that sat invisible between her and Trent. The judge's neutral expression hid the quiet tension that rippled through every bench. The lawyers shuffled papers, waiting for the opening statements, but Kayla felt the way the air moved differently now, heavier, tighter. Trent's outburst wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was an admission of who he really was. And in a case built on accountability, sometimes the most powerful evidence is the thing the defendant can't keep from showing in plain sight. Her attorney leaned in, voice low but sharp, reminding her to stay composed, to let the record speak for itself. That was easy advice to give and harder to follow when the man who'd already assaulted you once was now sitting 15 feet away, staring like he still had something to prove. Kayla focused on her breathing, the way she'd been trained, slow in, slow out, filtering the noise of the room until the sound of shuffling papers and murmured voices became a distant hum. But her mind was anything but calm. She was thinking about how this trial was more than just her own fight. In her career as a Navy SEAL, she had risked her life to protect civilians overseas, dismantling dangerous networks with precision and discipline. Now, she was back on American soil, facing a different kind of threat. A system that had protected Trent and others like him for years under the guise of law and order. The first days after filing the lawsuit had been almost silent, like the calm before a storm. Then the pushback came. Anonymous letters slipped under her door. A message spray-painted in red across her mother's fence. Ugly words meant to scare. She didn't flinch then, and she wouldn't now. She knew intimidation tactics when she saw them. She also knew that the moment you let fear dictate your next move, you'd already lost. What Trent didn't realize, what the whole department didn't realize, was that she wasn't just another civilian they could pressure into silence. The misconduct claims weren't just hers. Other complaints had been buried in sealed files for years, each one dismissed quietly before it could reach the public. Her case, if handled right, could pull all of it into the light. That's why today mattered. That's why she had to hold her ground. The court clerk called the session back to order, and the sound of chairs scraping filled the air as everyone stood for the judge. Kayla caught a glimpse of a reporter's notepad with her name written in block letters, underlined twice. The press knew this wasn't just another trial. They could smell when a story was about to go national. And with every camera pointed her way, every lens capturing the look on Trent's face, she could feel the shift beginning. The balance of power was starting to tilt, and not in his favor. What he'd done today might have been meant to rattle her, but in the world of civil rights investigations and police accountability, it was the kind of mistake that could blow a case wide open. All she had to do now was let him keep making them. The tension in the courtroom had turned into something almost physical, a pressure you could feel in your chest. Officer Trent sat slouched in his chair now, but there was a twitch in his jaw that told Kayla he wasn't done trying to provoke her. The judge's voice droned through procedural instructions, yet every person in the gallery knew they were sitting on the edge of something volatile. Then it happened. Quick, crude, and utterly reckless. Trent stood, closed the gap between them in 3 strides, and with a sudden pivot of his boot, struck her shin again. This time it was harder, sharp enough that the hollow crack of contact echoed under the high ceiling. The room gasped as one. A few reporters scrambled to raise their cameras, others simply stared, stunned at the audacity of doing this in front of a judge, a jury, and an open press pool. Kayla's breath hitched, not from the pain, but from the realization of how perfectly he'd just given her what no cross-examination ever could. Live undeniable evidence of assault in a federal proceeding. She didn't rise to his bait. Instead, she reached calmly into her blazer, pulled out her phone, and without glancing down, pressed a single button. No words, no explanation, just a quiet connection to a line very few people in the country could dial. Trent sneered, muttering something about calling her friends loud enough for the jury to hear. He didn't notice the subtle change in her posture, the slight tilt of her head that meant she was already 3 steps ahead. The judge was pounding the gavel, demanding order, but the noise was drowned out by the sound of heavy, synchronized footsteps in the corridor outside. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and in came two NCIS agents in dark suits, followed by a Navy commander in full-dress uniform. Conversations died mid-sentence. The air shifted from chaos to stunned silence. Every badge in that room knew the weight those uniforms carried. The commander's eyes swept the courtroom, stopping on Trent. In his hand was a sealed document, the kind that didn't get faxed or emailed. It was hand-delivered under federal authority. "Officer Mark Trent," the commander said, his voice cutting through the still air like a blade. "You are under federal arrest for assault, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under color of law." The words landed like hammers. Before Trent could even form a response, the NCIS agents flanked him, cuffing his wrists with swift, practiced efficiency. Kayla didn't look away. She wanted him to see her standing there, steady, unshaken, as the very system he thought would protect him dismantled him in front of everyone. The cameras were rolling, reporters scribbling furiously, and in that moment the case was no longer just hers. It was a national story about police misconduct, military rights, and federal oversight. The kind of story that couldn't be buried, no matter how many favors were called in. The metallic snap of the handcuffs seemed to echo longer than it should have, a sharp punctuation that no one in the room could ignore. For a beat, no one moved. Then the tension fractured. A low hum of shocked murmurs rolled through the benches, the kind of sound that builds when people realize they've just witnessed something historic. The judge, who had been hammering the gavel moments earlier, now sat frozen, lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. His eyes darted between the commander and the NCIS agents as if calculating how much authority he still had in his own courtroom. Trent's attorney jumped to his feet, sputtering objections about jurisdiction and due process, but the commander didn't so much as glance at him. "This falls under federal jurisdiction," he said evenly, "and it's already in motion." The NCIS agents began guiding Trent toward the aisle, but he wasn't going quietly. His shoulders jerked as he twisted halfway back toward Kayla, his voice a low, venomous growl. "This isn't over." Kayla met his stare, her own voice steady enough to carry across the entire room. "It is for you." The room went still again. Someone in the gallery let out an audible, "Whoa," the kind that told you people would be replaying this moment in their heads and on their phones for weeks. A reporter in the second row was already whispering into her headset, likely feeding the live broadcast a play-by-play. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder. Word was spreading through the courthouse, drawing more onlookers toward the double doors. The commander handed a thick envelope to Kayla's attorney, sealed, marked confidential, the kind of document that could burn careers if opened on the wrong desk. It wasn't just about Trent anymore. The contents hinted at a broader investigation, one that could reach deeper into the department than anyone in this room had dared say out loud. As Trent was escorted past the press pool, cameras flashed in rapid bursts. Kayla could already imagine the headlines. "Police misconduct caught on camera inside courtroom." "Navy SEAL's case sparks federal arrest." Every angle, every frame, would show the same thing. An officer in cuffs, flanked by federal agents, and the woman he'd underestimated standing tall in the background. The judge finally cleared his throat, trying to salvage the proceeding, but the momentum had shifted irreversibly. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning in real time. And Kayla knew the moment those doors closed behind Trent, the fight she'd started would only get louder. The heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind Trent, and for the first time since the morning began, Kayla felt the atmosphere shift from tense to charged. The air wasn't lighter, it was sharper, alive with the hum of consequences finally catching up. Reporters whispered into microphones, jurors exchanged uneasy glances, and even the bailiff seemed unsure where to stand now. The commander didn't leave. Instead, he stepped forward, placing a steady hand on the plaintiff's table, his gaze fixed on Kayla. "We've got the rest," he said quietly, but in a tone meant to carry. It wasn't reassurance. It was confirmation. Confirmation that the call she'd made hadn't just summoned help. It had triggered a chain of authority that bypassed every corrupt layer of the local system. Her phone hadn't connected to a lawyer or a friend. It had gone straight to the Office of Naval Intelligence, the same network she'd worked with during high-risk operations overseas. The line she dialed was reserved for mission-critical emergencies, situations where lives, security, or the integrity of military law were at stake. And she had known, in the second Trent lashed out, that this was one of those situations. While the court clerk scrambled to restore order, the commander slid a slim folder toward her attorney. Inside was a federal order expanding the investigation from a single assault case to a multi-agency probe into police misconduct, obstruction of justice, and systemic civil rights violations. The list of names attached was longer than Kayla expected, and Trent was far from the top of it. This wasn't just about him anymore. He'd been the match that lit a fire already set to burn. Outside the courthouse, the news cycle was already spinning at full speed. Camera crews swarmed the steps, feeding live footage to networks across the country. Clips of Trent's courtroom assault, recorded from 3 different angles, had already gone viral on social media. The hashtags told the story as much as the footage. Hashtag police accountability, hashtag military rights, hashtag justice in uniform. Inside, the judge called for a recess, but half the room was on their phones, sharing the news before the bailiff could clear them out. Kayla remained seated, letting the noise roll past her. She'd learned long ago that you don't have to chase momentum if you know it's already carrying you where you need to go. She could feel the eyes on her, some curious, some skeptical, some quietly grateful. When the NCIS agents returned briefly to collect a signed acknowledgement from the judge, one of them leaned down and said, "You just helped us open the door we've been knocking on for years." She didn't smile, but she nodded, because she understood exactly what he meant. This was the response she'd been fighting for. Not just punishment for one man, but the start of systemic change. What Trent thought was a moment of dominance had become the moment his entire shield collapsed. And now, for the first time in this battle, Kayla wasn't just defending herself, she was leading the charge. The courthouse lobby was a storm of flashing cameras, shouted questions, and the low rumble of voices passing judgment in real time. Kayla stepped through it like she was moving through the surf, steady, deliberate, letting the noise break around her without touching her focus. Every lens tried to capture her face, every microphone stretched forward to pull a quote, but she knew the value of silence. Let the video speak. Let the image of a police officer in cuffs, escorted out by federal agents, do the talking. Her attorney handled the press with the skill of a man who'd been here before. Brief, factual statements about an active federal investigation and clear evidence of civil rights violations. Behind them, the commander and his agents moved without fanfare toward waiting black SUVs, their presence a reminder that this was no longer just a local story. Inside one of those SUVs sat a secure case holding evidence collected during months of quiet surveillance. Intercepted communications, falsified reports, and the kind of internal memos that never survive sunlight. Trent's assault on her in open court had been the final piece, the moment that transformed a fragile case into an unstoppable one. As she reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, her phone buzzed. The number flashing on the screen was one she recognized instantly: Washington. She answered without breaking stride. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, but carried an edge she'd heard in combat briefings. "Monroe, we've been authorized to move forward on the full operation. We'll need you in D.C. by morning." No explanation, no need for one. She gave a simple, "Understood," and ended the call. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a breath that went all the way down. This wasn't over. It was just entering a bigger arena. The assault, the courtroom chaos, the viral footage. All of it had done exactly what needed to be done. The story was too big to bury now, too public for quiet deals in back rooms. And Kayla knew something Trent never understood. In the fight for justice, the loudest weapon isn't always your voice. It's the undeniable truth caught in the light, amplified until the whole country hears it. The next morning, Washington's cold winter air bit against her cheeks as Kayla stepped out of the black SUV and into the shadow of the federal building. Inside, the walls hummed with the quiet urgency of people who knew the weight of the work they carried. The operation briefing was short, direct: arrest warrants for multiple officers, seizure of evidence from the department, federal oversight to begin immediately. As she scanned the list of names, Kayla felt the ache in her shin where Trent had kicked her the day before. It was a reminder that some battles are fought in deserts and oceans, and others are fought in courtrooms where the rules are written in paper and ink, but the stakes are no less life-changing. Later that week, she returned to her hometown. The courthouse was quieter now, the cameras gone, the sidewalk empty except for one figure waiting by the steps, a young woman holding a toddler. She approached cautiously, her voice low. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. He used to pull me over for no reason. I thought nobody would believe me." Kayla crouched so they were eye level. "They believe you now," she said, and meant it. The woman's eyes glistened, and for a moment the noise and chaos of the last few days fell away, replaced by the simple truth of why she'd fought so hard. Walking back to her car, Kayla glanced once more at the courthouse doors. They no longer felt like a fortress guarding the untouchable. They felt like a place where, at least for now, the light could reach inside. She knew there would be more fights ahead. The system didn't change overnight. But the clip of Trent's arrest, the federal investigation, the voices now speaking up in its wake, all of it was proof that silence wasn't the only option. As the engine started and the road opened ahead, she thought of the phrase she'd lived by in combat and carried into civilian life. Never let them write the ending for you. In this chapter, at least, she had made sure of that.